Hi everyone, this is example 7 on page 8 in the activity packet, and example 7 is about designing a study. If you haven't already, read through the research question and the study designs described here, pause the video and take a minute and do that. Our research question is asking, does participating in group work improve a college student's comprehension of course concepts? Our first question is asking, for these two studies that are explained, what are the explanatory and response variables? The research question asked about participating in group work and the course concepts. If we look back at our in your packet, we see that the explanatory variable is defined as the variable that may explain or even cause the change. So in this case, the group work is what's going to improve a college student's comprehension according to the research question. So group work would be the explanatory variable. So let's take a minute and note that down on our papers. Okay, my note here says that the explanatory variable is group work because this will potentially change student comprehension. Our response variable is defined as a variable that measures the outcome of the study. So in this case, in Study Design 1, they're measuring students' feelings about learning better, and in Study Design 2, they're measuring with a short quiz whether or not student understanding has changed. So in both of these study designs, the measurement or the response variable is the student's comprehension of course concepts. Oops. The next question asks, which of these studies is an observational study and which is an experiment? So if we look back at page 1, our vocabulary there explains that an observational study observes individuals and measures the variables of interest. And the main purpose of an observational study is to describe a group or behaviors that are already going on. An experiment, also defined on page 1, intentionally manipulates or changes something in an attempt to cause an effect from one variable to the next. So the primary goal of an experiment is to provide evidence for this cause and effect relationship. So our observational study here is Study Design 1, where students are responding to the poll, but the researchers are not making any changes. Study Design 2, where the students are separated into different class sections and then are studied the effect of group work on 5 of those classes, is the experiment because the researchers are changing the experiences that the students have in the different groups. Okay, so when we do something like in Study Design 2, where they're changing the experience or somehow manipulating the individuals in the study, then that becomes an experiment. Our next question asks, what is the population being studied? Or in other words, what is the group that these studies will draw a conclusion about? So in this case, they're looking at college students at campuses across the nation in study 1. And in study 2, they're identifying 10 sections of a typical college course from colleges across the nation. So in both of these studies, our population are students from colleges across the nation. Now our next question asks about what is the sample in each case. So if we look back for study design 1, the sample is the 1,000 college students that are taking part in the poll. And we'll assume that these 1,000 college students, or I believe it tells us, are from colleges across the nation. Yeah, it tells us that the 1,000 college students at campuses come from across the nation. Study design 2, it's 10 sections of a typical college course from colleges across the nation that's being used for our sample here. So for study design 2, the sample is 10 sections, or we should say 10 classes, of college students across the nation. And then our next question asks, for study design 2, what confounding factors might realistically confound these results? So if you look back on page 6, we see confounding is described as when the effects of the explanatory and the lurking variables cannot be distinguished in the effects on the response variable. So remember, looking back, that our response variable is student comprehension of course concepts. And in study design 2, they're looking at group work in 5 of the classes and not in the others. So things that might confound this are who is the professor for each of the classes, what types of content is on the quiz, right? How long the students have to take the quiz. These are all examples of confounding variables. And I'm going to end this with an etc. because there may be other confounding factors that you have thought of that you could add to this list. Okay, if we go on to page 9, this is example 8 about examining a study. So take a minute and read through. This is a long description, so you probably want to pause the video. So question A is asking, is this an experiment or an observational study? So we have to go back to our vocabulary on page 1 and remember an observational study observes individuals and an experiment does some intentional manipulation. So if we look back at the description, we see in the design they talked about a single-blind, randomized, controlled trial of 25 U.S. healthy, weight-stable male and female volunteers aged 18 to 35 with a BMI between 19 and 30 were in that sample. And then if we keep reading, we read about the intervention. And it tells us that participants consumed a weight-stabilizing diet for 13 to 25 days. And they were randomized to diets containing either 5% of energy from protein, 15%, which is normal protein, or 25%, which is high protein. And then they were overfed these diets. So in this case, they're not just observing the participants or the sample. They are intentionally manipulating the eating habits of the participants in this study. So I think that points really clearly that this is an experiment. Okay, so my summary sentence here is that this is an experiment because the researchers intentionally manipulate the eating habits of the participants in the study. So you may have written your sentence different as long as you got the main ideas across that this is an experiment and that the researchers are manipulating the participants or the sample size. Question B asks, what are the explanatory and what are the response variables? So remember from page 6 that the explanatory variable is what we think might explain or even cause the changes, and the response variable measures the outcome of the study. So if we look back, the explanation or the change that they're making is the amount of protein in the diet of the participants. And this makes sense because they're trying to measure up here in the first paragraph, they explain they're trying to measure the effects of overconsumption of different protein diets. So our explanatory variable is how much protein is in the diet. The response variable is what they're measuring or the outcome. And we can see here when they talk about their weight stabilization and the weight gain, they seem to be weighing the patients at the end. So the response variable seems to be the weight gain and also the body fat increase. So the changes in weight, changes in body fat, also changes in energy expenditure and body protein. So our response variables are weight gain, change in body fat, and energy expenditure. So in this case, there's more than one response variable. That's fine. A study could measure many different things to try to figure out if there's a connection or correlation. And they want to know, is there a control group in this study? So if we look back, when they described, the participants were put into 3 different groups, right? They were put into the low protein group, the normal protein group, and the high protein group. And then they were all overfed, so there doesn't appear to be a control group. A control group, we know from our vocabulary, would be a group that receives no treatment, right? So all participants were put into one of 3 categories. So it would appear that there was not a control group here. Question D asks, what are the confounding variables the study attempts to control, and how does this study attempt to control each? So one thing the study is controlling is how much protein each participant eats. Let's look back and see what else the study is controlling. If we look here, they're all consuming a weight stabilizing diet for 13 to 25 days. So by first putting the participants on a diet to stabilize the weight, the researchers are controlling for anything that they might have had changes before or any weight variance. So we can say by putting the participants on a weight stabilizing diet, for 13 to 25 days, the researchers are attempting to control for weight differences and maybe differences in metabolisms. We know that in reality people are going to have different metabolisms and different eating habits, so these may be difficult to control, but the study is attempting to do that. Okay, our next packet pages are the group work assignments, and so go ahead and work in your groups on this. You can participate in the Module 1 group assignment forum on Desire to Learn.